He thought he could hide his true identity, just for a while, but one unexpected encounter made everything far more complicated than he ever imagined. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The harsh winter winds whistled through the bustling streets of Chicago in 1885 as Jonathan Hargrove, a 42-year-old railroad tycoon, stood at the window of his opulent office overlooking the city. His company, Western Railroad Enterprises, had just secured another major contract that would expand his empire even further west. Yet despite his tremendous success, a profound emptiness lingered in his heart. "Father, are you still working?" came a small voice from the doorway. Thomas, his 10-year-old son, stood there with his younger brother William, age 8. Jonathan turned, his stern expression softening. "Just finishing up, boys." Since losing their mother to pneumonia 3 years ago, he had struggled to be both father and mother to his sons while building his business empire. The boys were well cared for by their nanny, Mrs. Peterson, but Jonathan knew they needed more than material comfort. "Mr. Hargrove," his assistant Frederick interrupted, "the final papers for the Colorado expansion require your signature. Leave them on my desk. I'm taking my sons home." Jonathan made a sudden decision. "And cancel my meetings for the next 2 weeks." Frederick's eyebrows shot up. "Sir, we're going to Colorado. I need to see the land we're purchasing, and my boys need fresh air and adventure." The following morning, as their private railcar rolled through the countryside, Jonathan explained his plan. "We'll be staying in a small town called Pine Creek. It's where our new rail line will pass through." "Will we stay in a fancy hotel?" William asked excitedly. Jonathan hesitated. For years, he had watched other businessmen arrive in towns, flaunting their wealth, driving up prices, and buying loyalty. The locals always treated them differently, with either excessive deference or hidden resentment. "No," he decided. "We'll rent a simple cabin, and we won't tell anyone who we really are." "Like a secret mission." Thomas's eyes widened. "Exactly," Jonathan smiled. "We'll be simple travelers, a father and his sons looking to settle in the area. I want to see how the people truly live, how they truly feel about the railroad coming through their town." "But why, Father?" William asked. "Because sometimes the truth is only visible when no one knows who's watching." Jonathan ruffled his son's hair. "And perhaps we all need to remember what's real." 3 days later, they arrived in Pine Creek, Colorado. The small town nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains, with a creek running through its center. Instead of sending a telegram ahead or having his staff make arrangements, Jonathan hired a simple wagon at the station. "Name's Hank," said the weathered driver. "You folks new to these parts?" "Yes," Jonathan replied, using the cover story he'd prepared. "I'm John Harper. These are my sons Thomas and William. We're considering settling here." "What line of work you in, Mr. Harper?" Hank asked as they rumbled down the main street. "I was a clerk for a business back east," Jonathan replied, having chosen a profession that would explain his educated manner but not suggest wealth. "Looking for a fresh start after losing my wife." Hank's expression softened. "Sorry to hear that. Pine Creek's a good place for new beginnings." As they passed the general store, Jonathan noticed a woman arguing with the proprietor. Even from a distance, her presence was commanding. She wore a simple blue dress, her chestnut hair pulled back, but it was her confident stance that caught his attention. "That's Miss Eleanor Walsh," Hank volunteered, following Jonathan's gaze. "Owns the most successful farm outside town. Inherited it when her father passed 2 years ago. Runs it all by herself with just a couple of farmhands. Stubborn as they come, but fair and kind-hearted." Jonathan found himself intrigued. "Does she have family?" "Nope. Just her and that farm. Been turning down suitors left and right. Says she's too busy for romance." Hank chuckled. "Town's having a harvest festival tomorrow night. You folks should come. Good way to meet everyone." At the small cabin they'd rented on the edge of town, Jonathan watched his sons explore with excitement. For the first time in years, they weren't surrounded by servants and luxury. Here, they were just boys, climbing trees, skipping stones in the creek, getting their clothes dirty. That night, as they ate a simple meal Jonathan had clumsily prepared, William asked, "Father, will we see that lady from town again? Miss Walsh?" "Perhaps," Jonathan replied, surprised by his own eagerness at the prospect. "You kept looking at her," Thomas observed with the directness of childhood. Jonathan felt his cheeks warm. "I was merely curious about the local residents." His sons exchanged knowing glances, and Jonathan realized with some embarrassment that his interest had been more transparent than he thought. "Maybe," Thomas suggested innocently, "we should go to that festival tomorrow." Jonathan nodded, his thoughts drifting to the determined woman at the general store. "Yes," he said, "I believe we should." The Harvest Festival transformed Pine Creek's town square into a vibrant spectacle of autumn colors. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a warm glow over wooden tables laden with homemade foods. A small band played lively tunes as children ran about and adults chatted in groups. Jonathan felt oddly nervous as he and his sons approached the gathering. In Chicago, he attended lavish social events regularly, but there he was, Jonathan Hargrove, railroad magnate. Here, he was simply John Harper, widowed father of 2, new to town and unknown. "Look, father," William pointed excitedly, "pie contests." "And games," Thomas added, eyeing the ring toss set up near the bandstand. "Go ahead, boys." Jonathan handed them each a small coin. "Stay where I can see you." As the boys dashed off, Jonathan wandered through the crowd, nodding politely at the curious glances sent his way. He overheard snippets of conversation about crops, weather, and, inevitably, the railroad coming to town. "It'll bring more business," a shopkeeper argued. "And drive up our costs," countered an older farmer. "Those railroad men care nothing for small folk like us." Jonathan winced internally but kept his expression neutral. These were exactly the honest opinions he'd come to hear. "Mr. Harper, isn't it?" a female voice called from behind him. He turned to find Eleanor Walsh holding 2 cups of cider. She offered one to him with a direct gaze that made him momentarily forget his practiced story. "Thank you, Miss Walsh." He recovered, accepting the cup. "Though I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Small towns," she smiled. "News travels fast. Hank mentioned you and your boys were looking to settle here." Her smile was warm, but her eyes were assessing. "What brings you to Pine Creek specifically? We're hardly on the main routes." "Fresh air, simple living." Jonathan gestured around. "Community." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Those are good reasons. Better than some I've heard." She paused. "Your boys seem to be enjoying themselves." Jonathan followed her gaze to where Thomas and William were participating in a sack race, laughing as they tumbled to the ground. "They needed this," he admitted honestly. "After their mother passed, I threw myself into work, perhaps at their expense." "Grief has no rule book, Mr. Harper," she said softly. "I lost both my parents within a year of each other. Some days the farm was the only thing that kept me moving forward." "Please call me John," he said, finding himself wanting to hear more of her story. "Your farm. Hank mentioned it's quite successful." Pride flashed in her eyes. 70 acres of workable land. We grow primarily wheat, but also vegetables and some fruit trees. My father taught me everything about farming since I was a child." "No brothers to inherit the land?" Jonathan asked before realizing how presumptuous the question sounded. "No brothers," she confirmed without offense. "And before you ask what most do, yes, I could have sold the farm and married, but why would I give up something I love and am good at?" Her chin lifted slightly. "The land is mine. The work is hard but satisfying, and I answer to no one but myself and the seasons." Jonathan found himself smiling. "A commendable position. And unusual, I know," she added with a slight defensiveness that suggested she'd faced criticism for her choices. "Independence is something to be admired, not questioned," Jonathan said sincerely. In his business dealings, he'd met few women with Eleanor's evident self-possession. Their conversation was interrupted as Thomas and William came running up, faces flushed with excitement. "Father, I won a ribbon in the sack race," William announced, proudly displaying a blue ribbon. "And I got second in the apple bobbing," Thomas added. "Well done, boys," Jonathan beamed. "May I introduce Miss Eleanor Walsh? Miss Walsh, these are my sons, Thomas and William." The boys bowed politely as they'd been taught. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Walsh," they chorused. Eleanor crouched slightly to meet them at eye level, a gesture that immediately endeared her to Jonathan. "The pleasure is all mine, young gentlemen. Are you enjoying our little festival?" "It's wonderful," William exclaimed. Much more fun than the parties back in our old town, Jonathan quickly interjected, giving William a meaningful look. If Eleanor noticed the exchange, she didn't comment. Instead, she said, "There's to be a picnic by the creek tomorrow afternoon. Perhaps you and your father would like to join. Several families will be there and there's excellent fishing." "Can we, father?" both boys pleaded. Jonathan looked at Eleanor, whose invitation seemed genuine. "We'd be delighted." "Excellent. 1 o'clock, just past the old mill." She glanced over her shoulder as someone called her name. "I should go help with the dessert table. It was lovely meeting you all." As she walked away, Thomas looked up at his father with a knowing smile. "She's nice, father. And pretty," William added with childish directness. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Yes, well, Miss Walsh seems to be a respected member of the community. It's good to make local acquaintances." "Is that why your ears are red?" Thomas asked innocently. Jonathan laughed despite himself and playfully chased his sons back toward the games, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The next day, they arrived at the picnic spot by the creek, a picturesque clearing where several families had already spread blankets. The boys immediately ran off to join other children skipping stones in the shallow water. Eleanor greeted them, wearing a simpler dress than the day before, her hair loosely braided for the casual occasion. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "We wouldn't miss it," Jonathan replied, lifting the basket he'd purchased from the general store that morning. "Though I should warn you, my contribution is store-bought. My culinary skills are severely lacking." "An honest man," she laughed. "A rare quality." Jonathan felt a pang of guilt at the irony of her words, given his deception about his identity. But the afternoon progressed pleasantly, with easy conversation flowing between them as they watched the children play. "Your boys are well-mannered," Eleanor observed. "Their mother must have instilled good values." "She did." Jonathan nodded, memories of his late wife bringing the familiar ache. Catherine was gentle but firm. She believed children should be respectful but never afraid to speak their minds. "A wise woman. You must miss her terribly." "Every day," he admitted, "but it gets manageable with time." They were silent for a moment before Eleanor asked, "What did you do back east?" Jonathan hesitated. "I worked for a railroad company, in administration." "Ah." Eleanor's expression changed subtly. "We're expecting the railroad here soon. Mixed feelings about that in town." "Oh, why is that?" Jonathan asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Progress is inevitable, I suppose, but the railroad companies—" She shook her head. "They often make grand promises to small towns like ours. Prosperity, growth, connection to the wider world. But once they've bought the land they need, those promises sometimes evaporate." Jonathan felt defensive but forced himself to listen. "Has that happened here before?" "Not yet, but I've heard stories from other towns." She looked at him directly. "My farm sits on land the railroad wants for their route. Their representative offered to buy a portion of it last month." "And you declined?" Jonathan asked, suddenly uncomfortable. He knew exactly which farm she was referring to. It was listed in his acquisition documents as Walsh property, negotiations ongoing. "I did. It's the most fertile section of my land, passed down through my family for generations." Her jaw set firmly. "Some things are worth more than money, Mr. Harper." Before Jonathan could respond, William came running up, dripping wet and laughing. "Father, I caught a fish with my hands." The moment broken, Jonathan turned to his son with forced enthusiasm. "Did you really? What a skilled fisherman you're becoming." As the afternoon wore on, Jonathan found himself increasingly drawn to Eleanor. Her laugh, her intelligence, her obvious affection for children, including his sons. But with each passing hour, the weight of his deception grew heavier. He was here specifically to assess the land purchases for his railroad, including Eleanor's farm. And he was beginning to care for the very woman whose land he was planning to acquire, by force, if necessary. The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Creek as Jonathan sat on the porch of their rented cabin, a telegram in his hand. Frederick had sent updates about urgent business matters requiring his attention, but for the first time in his career, Jonathan found himself reluctant to return to Chicago. "Father?" Thomas appeared in the doorway, still in his nightclothes. "Why are you up so early?" Jonathan tucked the telegram into his pocket. "Just enjoying the quiet, son. Come sit with me. Thomas settled beside him on the rough-hewn bench. Are we going to see Miss Eleanor again today? Would you like that? Jonathan asked, noting the hopeful tone in his son's voice. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. She promised to show us how to milk a cow, and she doesn't treat us like babies. After a pause, he added, I like how you smile more when she's around. Jonathan felt warmth spread across his face. Do I? Yes, like you did when Mother was alive. The simple observation struck Jonathan deeply. Had he been so transparent? More importantly, was Thomas right? These past few days with Eleanor had awakened something he thought long buried. A capacity for joy, for connection beyond business transactions and social obligations. We've been invited to dinner at her farm this evening, Jonathan said. Would you and William like to go? Yes, Thomas exclaimed, then lowered his voice as he remembered his sleeping brother. Will you tell her who we really are? The question hung in the air between them. Jonathan had been wrestling with this very dilemma. I don't know, Thomas. It's complicated. Because of the railroad. Thomas was more perceptive than Jonathan often gave him credit for. Yes. Jonathan sighed. The railroad needs part of her land for the new line. If she knew who I am, she'd be angry, Thomas finished. But isn't lying worse? Out of the mouths of babes, Jonathan thought ruefully. Yes, son, it is. I need to tell her the truth, but I'm afraid of losing her friendship. Mother always said the truth hurts sometimes, but lies hurt forever. Jonathan put his arm around his son's shoulders. When did you become so wise? Later that day, they took the small wagon Jonathan had rented and drove to Eleanor's farm. The property was even more impressive up close. Neat fields stretched toward the mountains. A sturdy barn stood beside a modest but well-maintained farmhouse, and fruit trees lined the approach. Eleanor greeted them at the gate, wiping her hands on her apron. Welcome to Walsh Farm, she called out cheerfully. You're just in time to help with evening chores before dinner. William practically leaped from the wagon. Can I feed the chickens? Certainly, Eleanor laughed. Thomas, would you like to help collect eggs? As the boys ran ahead, following Eleanor's farmhand for their assignments, she turned to Jonathan. And you, Mr. Harper, can help me in the garden if you don't mind getting your hands dirty. I'd be delighted, he replied, though his stomach knotted with anxiety about the confession he knew he needed to make. In the vegetable garden behind the house, they worked side by side, harvesting late summer squash and tomatoes. Eleanor's hands moved with practiced efficiency, while Jonathan followed her instructions clumsily but earnestly. You weren't joking about lacking culinary skills, she teased as he examined a squash uncertainly. Have you never harvested vegetables before? I'm afraid my experience with food begins at the market and ends at the dinner table, he admitted. A city man through and through, she nodded. Yet you're considering settling in a small town. It was the perfect opening. Jonathan set down his basket and took a deep breath. Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you. The seriousness in his tone made her straighten up, brushing soil from her hands. That sounds ominous. I haven't been entirely honest about who I am. The words felt thick in his throat. My name isn't John Harper, it's Jonathan Hargrove. She tilted her head, the name clearly meaning nothing to her. All right. I'm the president of Western Railroad Enterprises. Eleanor went very still, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief and then, most painfully, to betrayal. The same company trying to buy my land. Yes. Jonathan forced himself to meet her gaze. I came to Pine Creek to personally assess the route and the community's reaction to it. And you pretended to be someone else to do it. Her voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. To what end, Mr. Hargrove? To find my weaknesses? To gain information you could use against me in negotiations? No, it wasn't like that, he protested. I wanted honest opinions about the railroad, not the deferential treatment my position usually elicits. And what about befriending me? Was that part of your strategy too? The hurt in her eyes was unmistakable. Get close to the stubborn farmer, perhaps persuade her where your representatives failed. That was never my intention, Jonathan insisted. Meeting you was unexpected. Getting to know you and caring about you was even more so. Eleanor laughed bitterly. Caring about me, while hiding your identity and planning to take my land. I understand why you're angry. Do you? She interrupted. This farm is everything to me, Mr. Hargrove. Not just my livelihood, but my heritage, my parents' legacy, my home. And you've been sitting in my home, accepting my hospitality, all while planning to run your trains through it. The original plan called for acquiring that land, yes, Jonathan admitted. But I'm telling you the truth now because you got caught? Eleanor shook her head. Or were you planning to reveal yourself dramatically once you'd secured my trust? Perhaps offer me a better price as a special favor? Neither, Jonathan said, his own frustration rising. I'm telling you because I respect you too much to continue this deception. Because my sons adore you. Because He stopped himself. Because you what? Eleanor challenged. Before he could answer, Thomas and William came running around the corner of the house, faces alight with excitement. Miss Eleanor, we collected 27 eggs, William announced proudly. And I helped milk the cow, Thomas added. Seeing the tension between the adults, they fell silent. Eleanor forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well done, boys. Why don't you take those eggs to Martha in the kitchen? She'll show you how to clean them properly. Once they were gone, Eleanor turned back to Jonathan. I think you should leave. Eleanor, please. Miss Walsh, she corrected coldly. Your sons are welcome to stay for the dinner I promised them. They shouldn't be punished for their father's deceptions. Martha will bring them back to town afterward. I understand you're angry. Jonathan tried again. But if you'd allow me to explain. There's nothing to explain. She cut him off. You came here under false pretenses. You lied to everyone, including your own children. And now you've put me in the position of having to disappoint two wonderful boys who deserve better. Her voice wavered slightly. Please go, Mr. Hargrove. Jonathan wanted to argue further, but recognized the futility. With a heavy heart, he nodded. May I at least say goodbye to my sons? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded stiffly. After explaining to the confused and disappointed boys that he needed to return to the cabin to address some business matters, promising to see them when they returned later, Jonathan climbed back into the wagon. As he looked back at the farmhouse, he saw Eleanor watching from the porch, her expression unreadable from a distance. The ride back to town gave him ample time to contemplate the mess he'd made. He'd come to Pine Creek to better understand the impact of his business decisions, and in the process, he'd experienced firsthand the human cost of those decisions. Eleanor Walsh wasn't just a name on a property deed. She was a remarkable woman, with deep ties to her land, a woman who had awakened feelings in him he thought were long dead. And now, because of his deceit, he'd likely lost any chance of winning her trust again. At the cabin, Jonathan paced restlessly, the telegram from Frederick seeming inconsequential now. His mind raced with possible solutions, ways to make amends, alternatives that might satisfy both the railroad's needs and Eleanor's attachment to her farm. By the time Thomas and William returned, subdued and confused by the evening's events, Jonathan had made a decision that would either save everything or cost him dearly. Boys, he said as they settled by the fire, I need to tell you a story about a man who lost sight of what truly matters and how he hopes to make things right. The following morning, Jonathan rose before dawn. He'd spent much of the night drafting telegrams to his board of directors and sketching alternative routes for the railroad. His plan was risky, professionally and personally, but he felt more certain of this decision than any business deal he'd ever made. Are we going to see Miss Eleanor today? William asked hopefully over breakfast. Jonathan hesitated. I hope so, son, but I need to fix my mistake first. Will she forgive you for not telling the truth? Thomas asked, his young face serious. I don't know, Jonathan admitted. But whether she does or not, I need to do what's right. After breakfast, he took the boys to the telegraph office and sent several urgent messages to Chicago. Then he visited the town's small law office, where he spent an hour in private consultation with the elderly attorney. By midday, he had secured a rented horse and was riding toward Eleanor's farm, a leather portfolio tucked securely inside his jacket. His heart pounded as he approached the farmhouse, rehearsing what he would say if she even allowed him to speak. Eleanor was in the front yard, hanging laundry, when she spotted him. Her body tensed visibly as he dismounted and approached the fence. Mr. Hargrove, she acknowledged coldly. I believe we said all that needs saying yesterday. Please, just 5 minutes, Jonathan requested. Then I'll leave, and never trouble you again if that's what you wish." She regarded him silently, then nodded once. 5 minutes. Thank you. He opened the gate but remained a respectful distance from her. First, I want to apologize. You're right. I came here under false pretenses and nothing excuses that deception. Apology noted, she said, her voice neutral. Is that all? No. Jonathan removed the portfolio from his jacket. I spent last night redesigning the railroad route. It will now follow the ridge line to the east of your property, leaving your farm completely intact. Eleanor's expression flickered with surprise. That would add considerable expense to your project. Yes, Jonathan acknowledged. But after seeing this place, understanding what it means to you, I realize some things are more valuable than money or convenience. Why? She asked directly. Why would you do this? Your shareholders won't be pleased. Because coming to Pine Creek has changed me, he said honestly. For years, I've made decisions based on maps and ledgers, not considering the people affected by those decisions. My wife used to remind me that behind every business transaction are human lives. I lost sight of that after she died. Eleanor's stance softened slightly. And now? Now I see clearly, Jonathan continued. I see a community that deserves to benefit from progress without sacrificing its soul. I see my sons happier here in 1 week than they've been in 3 years in Chicago. He took a deep breath. And I see a remarkable woman who reminded me what integrity looks like. Eleanor studied the documents he offered, her brow furrowed. This must be costing your company a fortune. The company will survive, Jonathan said, and I've taken steps to ensure Pine Creek benefits properly from the railroad's arrival. Fair compensation for any land purchased, hiring local workers for construction, reduced shipping rates for local farmers. He paused. All legally binding, not just promises. You did all this overnight? Eleanor sounded skeptical. I sent a flurry of telegrams, he admitted with a small smile. My board of directors is probably in an uproar, but I'm still the majority shareholder. Eleanor set the papers aside and regarded him thoughtfully. Mr. Hargrove, Jonathan, please, he interjected gently. Jonathan, she conceded. This gesture is significant. But it doesn't erase the fact that you lied to me, to your children, to this entire town. You're right, he agreed. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. I don't expect forgiveness, Eleanor. I just wanted to make things right before we leave. You're leaving? She asked, something unidentifiable crossing her expression. Tomorrow, he nodded. The boys and I need to return to Chicago. I have a company to reform, and they have school beginning soon. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, then asked, And what will you tell your sons about us? About me? The truth, Jonathan said simply. That we met an extraordinary woman who taught their father an invaluable lesson about honesty, integrity, and what truly matters in life. A faint smile touched her lips. They're wonderful boys. They deserve that honesty. They asked if we could see you before we leave, Jonathan ventured. But I understand if you'd rather not. Eleanor sighed, her resolve visibly weakening. The boys are always welcome here. Thank you. Jonathan hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, nothing about my feelings for you was a deception. Their eyes met, and for a moment Jonathan thought he glimpsed a softening in her gaze, but she merely nodded and turned back to her laundry. Safe travels, Mr. Hargrove. Jonathan returned to town with a heavy heart. He'd done what was right, but it seemed the cost would be losing any chance with Eleanor. That evening, as he helped the boys pack their few belongings, a knock came at the cabin door. To his astonishment, Eleanor stood on the porch, a basket in her hands. I brought some food for your journey tomorrow, she said by way of explanation. Thank you, Jonathan said, stunned by her appearance. Would you like to come in? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. As she stepped inside, Thomas and William rushed to greet her with enthusiastic hugs. She couldn't help but return. We're going to miss you, Miss Eleanor, William said sadly. I'll miss you too, she replied, her voice gentle. Both of you. While the boys showed her their packed bags, Jonathan observed the easy affection between them. Catherine would have approved of Eleanor, he thought. She would have recognized the same strength and kindness that had drawn him to her. After the boys were sent to wash up before bed, an awkward silence fell between the adults. Thank you for coming, Jonathan finally said. It means a great deal to the boys, and to me. Eleanor twisted her hands together. I've been thinking about what you said, about trust and honesty. She met his gaze directly. I'm still angry about the deception, but I believe your intentions now are sincere. They are, he assured her. And I've realized something else, she continued. In just a few days, you and your sons have brought more life and joy to my world than I've known since my parents died. She took a deep breath. I don't want to simply say goodbye. Hope flickered in Jonathan's chest. What are you suggesting? I don't know exactly, she admitted. But perhaps we could write to each other. The boys could tell me about their school, and you could tell me about your company reforms. A slight blush colored her cheeks. And perhaps when the railroad is completed next summer, you might bring them back to visit Pine Creek. I'd like that very much, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. And perhaps you might consider visiting Chicago sometime? The boys would love to show you the city. Perhaps, she nodded, a smile finally breaking through. Though I warn you, I'm a farmer at heart. Cities make me nervous. Then we'll find the quietest gardens and parks, he promised. And the boys can show you their favorite spots by the lake. As they stood there, the promise of a future neither had anticipated just days ago hung between them. Jonathan resisted the urge to reach for her hand, knowing that trust would need to be rebuilt slowly. Will you have breakfast with us before we depart tomorrow? He asked instead. Yes, Eleanor agreed, and I'll bring fresh eggs from those chickens your sons helped tend. The next morning, their farewell was bittersweet. The boys hugged Eleanor tightly, extracting promises of letters and future visits. When it was Jonathan's turn to say goodbye, he took her hand gently. Thank you, he said simply, for your forgiveness and for the second chance I don't deserve. We all deserve second chances, Jonathan, Eleanor replied. Just promise me no more deceptions. On my honor, he vowed. As their train pulled away from Pine Creek Station, Jonathan watched his sons waving enthusiastically to Eleanor on the platform until she faded from view. The boys immediately began planning what they would include in their first letters to her. Jonathan smiled, looking out at the landscape rolling past. He had come to Pine Creek seeking business insights and had instead found something far more valuable, a reminder of who he truly wanted to be, both as a businessman and as a man. In his pocket was Eleanor's address, and in his heart was a certainty that this parting was just the beginning of their story. The railroad would indeed connect Pine Creek to Chicago, but the more important connection had already been formed, one built not on deception but on honesty, forgiveness, and the promise of something genuine. As Thomas and William chatted excitedly about their adventures and their hopes for Eleanor's visit to Chicago, Jonathan knew with absolute certainty that Catherine would approve. His sons were smiling again, truly smiling, and so was he. Some journeys, he reflected, took you exactly where you needed to go, even when you started with the wrong destination in mind.